So, this is Nikki Brown's editing tips. I think the first thing that you have to do when you've produced a novel is to find a way of getting some distance from it and getting an ability to look down on it, a fantastic overview. Now, some people suggest that you put your book away for a while, and that's a really good idea if you've got the time to do it or the patience. I've rarely got either. So what I do is I try and plot what happens chapter by chapter on my circular diagram, which you can read about on my website. And then I print out the novel. Sometimes it's good to do it in a different font from the one that you've written it in, so it reads slightly differently. And that can actually change things quite strangely if you change that. I sit down with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, some chocolate, a notepad and lots of pens. And I sort of, as I'm reading, I scroll all over it, like, who is this guy? Or why did he do that? This makes no sense. This is boring. Ugh, all those kind of things. So that gives me a kind of feel for it. Then I think you have to ask yourselves the really hard question. What is your story about? When you've read it through, it's actually quite a good time to try and put together a synopsis, which is always awful. The terrible things to write, they're really hard. But write a long one, and then when you've written a long one, think about writing a short one, and perhaps think about what your elevator pitch would be, your one-liner that would grab an editor. Now, my books don't really seem to do that very well, and I'm hopeless at them. But if you can do that, that's really useful, because that one line becomes your decision rule as to how you edit. Does everything in the book kind of serve that particular plot idea or thematic idea? You can also think about what the themes of the book are, and if you're writing for children, whether the messages of the book are actually messages that you want. So if it's a book where, as a feminist, you've written a book in which all the main characters are men and the only people who have any agency are men, you might want to think, is this something I really want to write? So when you've established what the story's about, I think the next thing you want to think about is, actually, have I got the best part of the story? Is this the best story I could tell? Is there another story in here that I'm missing that would be more interesting? That sometimes happens. And if my characters took different decisions in the course of the novel, would I have a more interesting story? Also, has the story I've got come from my head, and does it flow organically from the characters that I've got? Because sometimes you can decide what a story's about and impose it, so actually it makes very little sense for what the characters would do. So think about what that's about. Then who are your main actors? Who's your protagonist? Does that protagonist have agency? Should they have agency? Who prevents them from doing what they want to do? Does what they want to do at the beginning fit what happens at the end? Is there any kind of... Have they got mission creep, or have they actually started telling a different story halfway through? Have you got the right people doing it? Have you got the right number of characters? Have you got too many cluttering up the place, or too few so there isn't enough going on? Is the story too simple? Does it need greater complexity? If you can guess what's going to happen at the end from the beginning, maybe you want to think about making it a little bit more difficult to follow. So you've got the who's doing the story and what the story's about. Then you want to think about, why are they doing it? Are the motives of your characters in the story clear enough? Are they reasonable? Do they just do things because you want them to, or do they have some internal agenda of their own? Just look at that, because if they're just cardboard cutouts, that's going to really detract from the quality of your novel. Then I think you have to look again and think, okay, I've got the right story with the right people in it, and I'm following the right character. Am I doing it in the best way? So think about your point of view. Would it be better to go first person present tense, very trendy, or is your story better told with multiple viewpoints? And third, is it better in past tense perhaps? Does that give you a better feel for it? Think about that, because it's a terrible pain to have to rewrite a story, but sometimes it will produce much stronger work. So you think about those things. Think about the language that you've used. If you're writing for children, even for young adults, is it age appropriate? Are your sentences too convoluted? Have you got too much stuff in there that you don't really need? Is it funny enough if it's supposed to be funny? Are your sentences, is it really pitched? Is both the language and the content appropriate for your readership? Then I think if you're happy with all that, then you start looking at what you've actually got. Now, in my experience, when you write a novel, first off, you sometimes you spend too little time on really important sections of the novel, and you spend ages on not very important ones. You have very draggy chapters. Personally, I'm usually all okay at the beginning and I'm all right at the end, but in the middle I have a huge mess that often needs real pruning. Also, my endings are always too quick. So think about how much page time you're giving the really key turning points of your novel. Look at what the really important sections are. Are they big enough? Are they impactful enough? Do they take long? Can you picture them? Have you rushed over a really important scene because you couldn't visualize it? Think about, if you spend a chapter describing somebody's underwear and 3 lines on the sex scene, probably got it wrong around. Or same for, probably haven't got a sex scene in a children's novel, one hopes, but you might have. But, maybe a fight scene, or maybe an argument, or some turning point, which somewhere the emergence of an amazing beast that you spend 1 line talking about. Think about that, because it's very easy to shirk giving really hard things enough page time. So if it was difficult to write, it probably means you should spend more time writing it. And get rid of all the pointless stuff that goes around the edges, people talking to no end. So think about the shape of it. Is there enough tension? Does the tension grow in an appropriate way? Have you got moments of peace that really, because if it's all in the same pitch, even excitement can get a bit dull. So you want to put in a few chapters where you can characters can breathe and take stock. Have you got those in the right place? So look at the shape of that. Do the characters unfold in a good way? Are they consistent? If they're not consistent, is it clear that they're deliberately not consistent rather than you've just screwed up? So if your character's a liar, you might want to show a situation in which they say one thing to one person and do something else. But make that clear in the text by your extreme, the way you do it, that's intentional and you've not just messed up. So think about their consistency, the consistency between their personality, between their own thoughts if you show them, and what they say and do, and how other people perceive them. Just think about those different lenses and how they produce a rounded character. Okay, so then you go down to your chapters. There will be some chapters that don't need to be there. You can probably take out some of the material. If it's really important, stick it somewhere else. Or you might want to, as I mentioned, take out a few characters that don't need to be there. Think about the time scale. Is it occurring over the right kind of time period? Should it be quicker? Should it be more tense? Think about the shape of each chapter. Is each chapter exciting? In a children's book, the real trick is to keep the reader turning over the pages, so when they finish the chapter, they want to read the next one. So have you ended it in a way that's going to entice them to move forward, or is it sort of too closed down and complete? Is each chapter interesting? Does everything in the chapter serve more than one function? Has it got lots of narrative drive? Are you down with the character in the action, or are you waffling about description, or having conversations that are pointless, or going back into the character's head and telling them backstory we don't need? Is it all really honed and pointing forwards in the direction of the plot? Those things, you can waste a lot of time in a chapter just waffling. No chapter should waffle. Everything you do should fulfill more than one function. Dialogue. Does the dialogue fit the characters? Do they use the words that they would? Are they consistent? Are they comprehensible? Do they always use the same accent? All those kind of things. Once you've got all that done, then I think you do need to look at to make sure everything's consistent. You don't have strange people who have glasses at the beginning of a scene and none at the end, that you don't lose things on the way, that buildings don't change shape and floors change, and so you've got 6 doors in one and one on, so making sure that all that works, that journey times take the same amount of time going as coming back, unless there's a good reason why not, that you don't have 3 consecutive days, that people don't eat lunch 4 times in the same scene. These things are very easy to do as you write a book over the period, so check for all those kind of things. And also for consistency and for language. Then only when you've got all that sorted out. The other thing to check is sometimes when you're writing, you might leave ideas that you might want to use later, and you kind of have them sticking up in the text like loose threads. At the end, if they're not part of what you want, go back and trim them. Otherwise, they just confuse the reader. So make sure it's all honed. Everything in there needs to be there. And only then, when you've done all that, do you start looking at things on a sentence level and checking punctuation, spelling, formatting. That's the very, very last thing that you do. It is incredibly important, but do not do it first, because you really need to get the big picture and then hone down to the detail at the very last. Those are my tips. I hope they help.